All right, welcome back. Once again, this is Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex Season 1, the 26-episode TV anime from 2002, animated by Production IG, directed by Kenji Kamiyama, and loosely based on the manga by Shiro Masamune. Ghost in the Shell follows the exploits of an elite law enforcement squad, Section 9, led by the fully cyborg Motoko Kusanagi, the Major, and headed by Section Chief Aramaki. The team navigates a complex narrative of political intrigue and cyber terrorism while also tackling the philosophical themes that come with integrating technology with humanity and the nature of artificial intelligence. So any familiar tropes to any fan of cyberpunk. Now, the term standalone complex is an essential term for this anime, and the definition can be loosely defined as this social phenomenon where unconnected actions combine to create a group effort, though there's no leader maintaining the top of it. There's no ringleader or a ruling body. Think of it something like as mass hysteria, the Dancing Plague, the War of the Worlds radio drama, Y2K, Satanic Panic, that kind of stuff. And so it is through this smokescreen of deceptions, double bluffs, red herrings that Section 9 must wade through in order to uncover the true criminals behind a plot that has been maturing on the vine for years. Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex is the second animated outing of the Ghost in the Shell franchise, the first, of course, being Mamoru Oshii's 1995 movie adaptation, which was considered a major breakthrough for Production IG as a company and a surprise international hit for them. And he remained a regular collaborator with Production IG. They also animated his next film project, Jinro the Wolf Brigade. Oshii did not direct that film, but he was heavily involved in writing. It's one of his personal settings. He'd been trying to make this movie for years. So after Ghost in the Shell, he had the leverage to go, all right, now I want to make this movie. Production IG further leveraged the success of Ghost in the Shell 95 to invest in a number of projects, including their strategy of investing in their own projects. But one of the big ones was, of course, Hideaki Anno's smash hit success with Neon Genesis Evangelion over at Gainax. Production IG also assisted with the animation, later collaborating on another project at Gainax, this time led by Kazuya Tsurumaki with the OVA series Furikuri in 2000. These stories and more can, of course, be found in my Studio Rundown, Episode 1, covering Production IG. But parts of this episode will also expand on some of the points from that Studio Rundown episode, because the story of Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex is also a big part in the rise of Kenji Kamiyama as a director and creative figure at Production IG and, of course, later beyond. One of the first things I learned about Standalone Complex, even years ago, was how dang expensive this anime was to produce. And the production committee credits for Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex do reflect this. Now, typically when you see this long list of over 10 to a dozen producers, that could possibly be a sign of too many cooks in the kitchen. But in the terms of Standalone Complexes, a lot of these guys were there as sponsorships and things because there was a lot going into this production. In fact, for a long time, this anime held the record for being the most expensive production ever at a reported investment of around 30 million yen or $300,000 to $400,000 US dollars per episode. So the total production cost worked its way out to like $10 million, and that's in 2002 money. For comparison, this 30 million yen, 300 grand or so, was the rough equivalent to the cost of almost 3 episodes of One Piece in 2002. And that's 30 million yen after all the broadcasters, ad agencies, and sponsors took their cuts. It'd be about 10 million yen or so for One Piece. So Ghost in the Shell was spending the same on Production IG was spending the same amount for one episode of Standalone Complex as nearly 3 episodes of One Piece, just to put things into perspective. And additionally, the production schedule for Standalone Complex was different from the norm. This was produced at around 2 episodes per month. This is not a weekly drop series, and it was also one of those deliberate strategies on part of the committee, because Standalone Complex premiered in Japan not on a weekly broadcast schedule. It premiered on a satellite television network, Animax, and it aired on a pay-per-view basis. And so the total runtime of this 26 episodes was actually from October of 2002 to around October of 2003. And afterwards, was rebroadcast on the Nippon Television Network weekly in 2004. Animax also aired this series on its international networks, including Hong Kong, India, Taiwan, and Latin America. Animax also produced their own English dub, but of course all of the English broadcasts that we got over here, including the home video release, was dubbed by Animes, led by Kevin Seymour. And this was for the North American broadcast, and this premiered on the Cartoon Network's Adult Swim program, and I believe also like Canada's the Y7, and I believe Canada's YTV as well. As far as the home video side, we have Bandai Visual and Bandai Entertainment, which is the North American branch of Bandai's operations at the time, as well as Manga Entertainment invested in this anime to have the rights for the DVDs. So Bandai Visual, of course, has the DVD rights for Japan, while Manga Entertainment got North America and Europe, and then further distributed by Bandai Entertainment, which is how we have the DVD complete collection in the United States. It's still in print as far as my recent search, or at least available, and it's on Amazon right now for like $20 for the whole thing for season 1, and then season 2 was more like a different distribution, but this version is standard definition, 7 discs, a lot of interviews included in the extras, about 3 to 4 episodes on the disc. Manga Entertainment also released a Blu-ray, and this does have for both seasons, so you can get the entire 52-episode Ghost in the Shell standalone complex series for the total cost of around $40. And I still see copies of seasons 1 and 2 on the Walmart shelves, just on the rare occasion. And but probably the best option right now, if you're just trying to check out the series, is of course on streaming. Ghost in the Shell is still available for free on Tubi TV. It's free with ads. It's got both seasons and their compilation films and the standalone complex movie, which wraps up the whole thing. And season 1 was recently added to the Criterion collection, so it's another option for you there. But let's get into the staff breakdown for Ghost in the Shell standalone complex. So first off, we have the series director and head writer, series composition, Kenji Kamiyama. This was very much a project that he was put everything that he had into it, and he was very involved from the start. But Kamiyama-san got involved in animation independently as a high school student. He was initially hired at Studio Fuga in 1985. He did like background projects for anime films, Akira, Kiki's Delivery Service, among a few others, some background art. Kamiyama then moved over to Production IG, where he was a member of Team Oshii. And this is a team, it was essentially a group of, it was like a series of lectures that Mamoru Oshii held at Production IGs. And these are filmmaking lecture series. And so part of his tenure, or part of his education and time under Mamoru Oshii's tutelage, was students would contribute screenplays that could possibly be made into animation projects. It's, again, Mitsuhisa Ichikawa of the president of Production IG is always looking for new and original ideas. So it's one of those, like, we have this lecture series, let's have the students submit something and see if we can make a project out of it. And so Kamiyama contributed to the screenplay of Blood the Last Vampire. And it's an anime original film featuring a teenage girl killing vampires with a katana. It's just classic. Kamiyama and Junichi Fujisaku contributed to the screenplay of Blood the Last Vampire, and then Kamiyama moved on to serve as animation director for the film Genro the Wolf Brigade. So again, this is the movie set in Mamoru Oshii's Kerberos Saga universe, Kerberos Panzer Cops, but this was directed by Hiroyuki Okiura, who was the character designer on Ghost in the Shell 1995. And then afterwards, Kamiyama had his directorial debut, albeit in a short-form series. It's called Mini Pato. It's just a 3-episode short-form parody series of Pat Labor, again, done by Mamoru Oshii and directed by Mamoru Oshii. And it was one of Production IG's first projects after Red Bullet Zillion as their time under IG Tatsunoko. And then, they were the chief animators on both of the Pat Labor movies. But Ghost in the Shell standalone complex is Kenji Kamiyama's full television anime series debut. And Kamiyama is a self-proclaimed big fan of the Ghost in the Shell manga. And he talks about one of his interviews. He actually submitted a proposal in the mid-90s called The Asian Matrix. And the general premise is we follow this teenage girl, internet detective, a little bit of cyber sleuthing. But at the time, the internet was still very, very new. So this proposal was shot down. as too high concept. The internet portrayal as this vast network of information was just seen as too high concept at the time in the mid 90s. And of course, when The Matrix came out, it was one of those of like, oh, just everything changed. But just a fun coincidence there I wanted to talk about. But yeah, Kamiyama is a big fan of Ghost in the Shell, and Standalone Complex was something of a dream project for him. But he had a lot of hurdles to overcome at the beginning. So around the time that Kamiyama's wrapping up his obligations to Jinro the Wolf Brigade, the planning for the sequel to the Ghost in the Shell 1995 movie got underway in the spring of 2000, and then the final draft of the script was ready by 2001, with a expected production time of 4 years and a substantial amount of Production IG's resources. But in the meantime, studio president Ishikawa wanted to put out a companion project, ideally a television series, to build up advance hype for Ghost in the Shell 2. But the narrative challenges of adapting the source manga again, plus the association with Mamoru Oshii's film, were expected to be major headaches should the television series move forward into actual production. And of course, back then, standard television runtime was across 2 quarters, so again, 26 episodes. And based off the source manga, there's just not enough material for a straightforward adaptation. Again, just thinking back to my first episode on the 1995 movies, where Oshii's own struggles to adapt Ghost in the Shell manga that just took a lot of time to figure out. And so now, from years later, we have the opposite problem. How to expand the manga material where Oshii initially struggled to condense the manga material. And of course, it's now 5+ years since the release of that movie. It's now something of an institution. Ghost in the Shell was the example of the impossible adaptation made reality, in addition to all of the impressive effects work and just everything else. And it's a big deal, especially overseas. But Kamiyama's solution with the writing team, as far as the overall narrative, was we're going to throw the manga out the window. Okay, I'm kidding. It wasn't quite that drastic. Kamiyama's actual solution was we are going to adapt Ghost in the Shell as a police show. Section 9 will be portrayed as more like a police force. They solve crimes week to week, while a larger connected narrative is played out through the rest of the show. Create something new with the spirit of the original. So in the same way or the same path that Oshii took with the 1995 film, but it was something more just, again, to expand the material. And Kamiyama did, of course, regularly check in with his mentor during the script writing process. And so again, Kamiyama is credited as the series composition, so that the head writer on the show. Breaking down the script and screenplay credits, I'm going to start us off with Shiro Masamune. So yes, the comic author is on here, not just in a capacity of, hey, here's the guy who wrote the comic, here's his credit as Gensoku, original author. He also provided ideas, like they consulted with him on this anime, and he basically gave a lot of general outlines for a lot of episodes, and he also approved each script before they went into production. So Masamune Shiro has original author as well as what's called an assistance or cooperation credit. And so at Production IG proper, we have Junichi Fujisaku, who of course worked with Kamiyama to create Blood the Last Vampire, the film. He also wrote and directed the TV series Blood Plus, and supervised a lot of other entries in the franchise. He also wrote novelizations, some video game scripts, as well as the stage play, and he does have some further involvement with Ghost in the Shell. He was specifically a supervisor on the Ghost in the Shell Arise OVA series and the new movie that released about a decade later, I think like beginning in 2012, 2013, thereabouts. And then he also wrote the manga to the canon sequel to Ghost in the Shell 1.5, and this is titled Ghost in the Shell, The Human Algorithm, and this ran from 2019, recently wrapped in about August of 2025. This is following Bato and Togusa after the events of the main manga and the Ghost in the Shell, again, 1.5, as well as their new recruit. And this was published in the same magazine as the original Ghost in the Shell and has now been collected into 8 volumes. We also have Yoshiki Sakurai, who's a screenwriter on Holic and Moribito. And then we have over at Madhouse, he was on the script for Redline. He's since executed a career pivot to a film producer in the mid-2010s. He produced with the film Giovanni's Island in 2014, Cyborg 009, Call of Justice, and Napping Princess. He then moved to Netflix as an executive producer on the Netflix original anime line in the 2020s. And then around 2023, he left Netflix and formed his own production assistant studio, Salamander Pictures. We also have Shotaro Suga, who is written for Eureka 7 over at Bones, Blood Plus, Moribito, Eden of the East, and Darker Than Black. He's also been involved in the Resident Evil franchise with the plot of Resident Evil 6, as well as the Dark Side Chronicles and 2 movies, Resident Evil Biohazard and Resident Evil Damnation. Unfortunately, he's since been passed away since 2015. And rounding us off on screenplay credits is, of course, Dai Sato of Cowboy Bebop, Samurai Champloo, Space Dandy, and Wolf's Rain. He was also series composition on Eureka 7. And these are basically the main writers on this series. And so the first order of business that they had to tackle was the setting. Now, in the manga, the chief antagonist or the chief person that they are pursuing is an individual called the Puppet Master. And of course, if you've seen the first movie or if you've read the manga, the Puppet Master is gone. There is no Puppet Master in Ghost in the Shell standalone complex. This is more of a what-if scenario. Motoko Kusanagi never met the Puppet Master in 2029, which results in this parallel world of sorts that still exists in conversations with the events of Masamune's comic and the 1995 anime film. Generally, when it comes to the Ghost in the Shell franchise, you don't really need to worry about universal canon all too much. Yeah, it helps to have read the manga and watched the movie prior, but you can go into Standalone Complex completely blind. There are, of course, any number of references, but it is perfectly watchable by itself, and nothing from the 95 film or Ghost in the Shell 2 Innocence have anything to do with the events of Standalone Complex, which is one of those things of, I remember I ran into this exact issue myself when I was first getting into Standalone Complex. I kept waiting to see, this event or this reference, or I would catch some things and I go, okay, are they going with the movie direction? You don't have to worry about that. Just some advance notice there. And so Standalone Complex, it's largely set in the fictional Japanese port city of Nihama, and we begin in the year 2030. And so this follows Public Security Section 9, as I said before. This is a clandestine counter-cyber terrorism squad, primarily former military and police personnel who are responsible for mitigating threats which cannot be handled by normal security efforts. The cases they tackle are highly complex and layered, but then they mix it up between the week-to-week episodes. But for Season 1, I'm only focusing on Season 1 because while the events of Seasons 1 and 2, of course, directly flow into each other, the production staff on Season 2 is also a bit like the folks who were working on Ghost in the Shell 2 Innocence then moved on to Season 2 of Standalone Complex. So there is enough of a difference in staff, and there's also Season 1's villain is very much contained to Season 1. Season's 2 villain is very much self-contained to there. And also, it's more opportunities for me to talk about Standalone Complex. This is my favorite anime. Let me have this. So, Season 1, to get back on track, Season 1 is a major case called the Laughing Man Incident, which revolve around an event where a pharmaceutical company president is kidnapped and held for ransom on live television by a mysterious hooded figure who then escapes the scene and proceeds to pull off various daring computer heists against other pharmaceutical companies, as well as various phenomena like programming crop circles or moving every desk in an office building to the roof overnight. And he makes these shapes in this emblem. He's called the Laughing Man because his logo is this smiling face wearing a cap, and it's encircled by a quote from J.D. Salinger's novel, The Catcher in the Rye. And the quote is, "I thought what I'd do was, I'd pretend I was one of those deaf mutes." And this is far from the only references to Salinger's work in the anime, and also other various philosophers that are in that are in that kind of sphere. But the Laughing Man's logo and exploits he becomes internet famous, and he becomes an internet meme. And the logo is spread as this symbol of counterculture and punk culture. And, his logo is printed on bags, and it's at concerts, and, it's just everywhere. And suddenly, he vanishes from the net. And now, after years of inactivity, the Laughing Man has suddenly returned to the stage and brings with him a new wave of crimes that defy common logic. In practical terms, the episode structure of Ghost in the Shell standalone complex is divided across two types. So the anime begins with with 3 standalone cases. And these are episodes in which Section 9 solves a weekly cybercrime. It's something of like their regular day-to-day operations and more like these in-between cases, something that can be introduced and solved within an episode. The main case of Season 1, the Laughing Man storyline, this begins at episode 4 and goes through a series of arcs across the 26 episodes. So each arc is about 2, 3, or plus episodes. And then once that arc is done, it's then bridged by a number of standalone cases. And then the next arc begins, and we repeat the process until the final sprint of about 6 episodes, where Section 9 is really like they're closing in on the bad guys, but now the bad guys are springing the trap. So now Section 9 is fighting for their lives, and it's a massive sprint to the finish for the last 6 episodes. And so the standalone and complex episodes are both color coordinated, so they didn't tell anyone in the audience that this is going to be the structure, but people clued in very quickly, beginning with episode 4, like, why is the title card different? And so as the show was going on, they were monitoring, the chat rooms and things like, oh, okay, it's one of these episodes now. This also makes it easier if you want to, say, organize your a rewatch by only watching the Laughing Man cases or only watching the standalone cases. There's a nice little visual guide for you to do so. Going into more of the visual side, then with character designs, we have Makoto Shimomura, who's done animation director and related capacities since then, like Eden of the East, Blood Plus, Moribito. So again, another person who's worked with Kamiyama a bunch. And then the French co-production, Le Chevalier d'Homme. Production IG co-founder Takayuki Goto is also here, but in a capacity as an animation director, not in a usual deal as a character designer, as you would expect. But he is going to join the cast in Season 2. So the character designs, if we're talking about Ghost in the Shell in the general, what they were working with here, obviously the character designs are based in the original manga, just like the 1995 film, but the film kind of toned those down to give the cast more like an everyman look to match the more serious and grounded tone of the movie. And, like Multico in particular is in a body, like her face and profile is like she's in a mass-produced body. Hence that whole middle segment of the film where she's seeing her own face and body reflected in the civilians around her. And everyone's clothes in there like ordinary and muted and, very much fitting in the tone and the mood of Mamoru Oshii. For the sequel movie then with Innocence, and of course getting back here more importantly to standalone complex, character designs were once again drafted from the later chapters of the original manga, but these are not from, so the original film only had the first run. So afterwards, Masamune Shirow, of course, penned later entries past the original storyline. So from 1991 through 1996, we have a series of 4 chapters that were then collected into this volume of work that I called Ghost in the Shell 1.5 and a Human Error Processor. And then he penned an official sequel to Ghost in the Shell, Man-Machine Interface, in 1997. But the main thing about Ghost in the Shell 1.5 is, again, it's just 4 chapters. They were originally dropped from the final published book for Man-Machine Interface, and they weren't collected together again outside of their original magazine publication until a CD-ROM e-manga release in 2003 also had something like an audio drama aspect to it as well. Really interesting release. But this is 2001. Makoto and his crew are using designs from Masamune Shirow, because all of his other things, these are sequels to the original storyline, of course. And so the characters have undergone some changes. They've aged up a little bit, and they are, wearing their outfits, and they're wearing their hair a little differently. So they were primarily pulling from these entries, but at the time they were using these old scans from the 91 through 96 chapters, but before the final designs were fine-tuned from the animes. I thought that was just an interesting production note. But of course, for the character designs in this anime, they are kind of a fusion, I would say, maybe of Mamoru Oshii's films. Well, I would say, not Mamoru Oshii's designs, Hiroyuki Okiura's designs from the original film. They're designed to be still fit within the grounded nature of Ghost in the Shell, but they're just everyone's well. What am I trying to say here? Everybody's got the anime designs. They are designed with merchandising in mind. So I'm trying to say everyone is streamlined and sexy. Multico in particular, her everyday dress is apparently this leotard with an open back, complete with a jacket and boots, because the jacket over the leotard, over the one piece, makes it all tasteful. And the 80s are definitely still alive with the mullets and the open-faced jackets. Some of the Section 9 members also have some open-faced shirts, so some of the guys are showing off a little bit of muscle. Bato looks the most different, and he's got really like he's the most true to some of his manga designs. His hair is now combed back and tied into a ponytail. Bato's also bulked up since his last outing, although these are primarily through cyber implants. He's still the second most cyberized person in the squad after Motoko. And but notably, there's no naked camouflage suits in this anime. Again, that was a Oshii classic for the first film. Thermoptic camouflage in Ghost in the Shell world, and especially in the manga and here, is more like specialized SWAT gear. They got the form-fitting body armor, they got the ammo pockets and the helmets. Of course, paradoxically, the Section 9 crew never wears the helmet, so you can tell who they are for audience purposes. But like the regular police, it's more like the elite guys all have thermoptics. So it's still kind of a big deal when someone has one of these suits that can make them go invisible, but it's not like the original movie where it's like only Multico and like a few people have it. But like I said, these designs clearly inspired by the original manga series, but of course there's no goofy cutaways or no one ever goes chibi, none of the goofy cutaways that were occasionally in Shiro's manga. Getting into mechanical designs, the characters are obviously very sleek and sexy, and Ghost in the Shell is also known for its sleek and sexy rounded machines, most notably the spider tanks. Fuchikoma in the manga, they are called Tachikoma in the television anime. Basically, Production IG was unable to get permissions to use the manga designs, so Masamune-san whipped up some legally distinct versions for standalone complex. So the Tachikoma, these are the AI support bots for Section 9. I believe this is their on-screen debut, the PlayStation 1 game notwithstanding. This is their on-screen television debut. So the spider tanks are like, they've got the 4 legs, and they've got the omnidirectional wheels. They got the 2 arms with manipulators that also house machine guns. They come with a variety of loadouts depending on the mission. I've seen miniguns, rocket launchers, shields. They're about the size of a small sedan, and so they have a abdominal section, an abdominal pod that can house a pilot, and or if they need to throw a hostage in there or someone or a high value target, they can throw them into a Tachikoma and have a little bit of armor plating. But when it comes to like the really big spider tanks and the really big guns, the Tachikoma are not going to get the job done. But against standard issue fire, the Tachikoma can take a decent beating. They are also spider-like in that they can stick to walls and ceilings, leaping across large gaps. They also have thermoptic camouflage, but chiefly they can also shoot this adhesive string from some side launchers. And so you have regular things of grappling targets or attaching to buildings or even rappelling across buildings, like Spider-Man. Obviously, like I said, the big tanks from the 95 movie are also here with the facelift. You can think of them like just upscale Tachikomas with a different paint job and much bigger guns. But the Tachikoma have these childlike personalities, and they are very curious about the world around them. They are ostensibly in their capacity as the comic relief, and they pull all kinds of mild pranks against the Section 9 members, much to the various chagrin of or alternatively delight and bemusement of the Section 9 members. And so it's, again, tying into, for the manga purposes, this was Shiro Masamune's way of tying in AI and human relationships and really making you think, whenever these machines, these machines for the most part are pretty self-aware, and they do synchronize all of their experiences nightly. So they are obviously military hardware, but they have such a childlike innocence and personality to them that even in the middle of a firefight, like they have no concept of danger. So it's always like, even if they're known for like saying a bunch of funny lines or having over the top reactions, but all at the same time, even as you're chuckling, I find myself kind of going, that's kind of interesting or concerning that they have this kind of attitude to the tense situation that everybody else is experiencing. But again, the Tachikomas are just completely oblivious to any kind of danger. But, speaking of their interactions with Section 9, Bato, for instance, has a favorite unit. He treats it basically like a pet, to the occasional frustration of Motoko, his boss, who she's more reluctant to engage with the Tachikoma beyond giving out orders, and Motoko drives any unit like she stole it. Usually ends up pushing the machine past its limits or doing some high-speed chase, or uses it as a bullet shield, or sometimes, speaking of going up against an impossible matchup, she tries to take down an anti-tank helicopter with the Tachikoma. She's not trying to take out the anti-tank helicopter, but she's trying to distract it, and so of course her unit just gets shot to pieces. And it's usual pattern with Motoko. She usually wrecks whatever Tachikoma that she's driving, so you rarely ever see her drive it. But it is interesting to watch the Tachikoma develop individual quirks throughout the series, and this is reflected more in the English side of things, when the Tachikoma have not one, but 3 voice actors to further drive this part home. But, finally talking about the people who designed and helped animate all of this stuff, we have Shinobu Tsuneki and Kenji Teraoka. So these guys are mostly freelance, acting in a freelance capacity, but they did work on a lot of production IG and Sunrise anime projects. And I also have some video game credits for them. They've done mechanical designs for Sakura Wars, Armored Core 5, and then a Sega Saturn game from 1997, Bulk Slash. They're also credited for the Tachikoma designs in Standalone Complex, the video games, so on the PlayStation 2 and the PlayStation Portable. More general designs outside of the Tachikoma, you got the military aircraft and helicopters also pay homage to their manga designs that have all of the, slight animal, or in this case, like some insectoid influences, and of course there's slight transforming elements. So again, nothing as serious as like Macross or anything, but you have like Section 9's twin rotor craft is one of these hybrids that can take off and land as a helicopter, then morph its wings into an airplane and then back to a helicopter, and do all kinds of maneuvers. And that's something that exists in the world today. We have hovercopters and we have these kinds of planes. So it's not as sci-fi, but that's not really the point. Like, not everything, like there are no flying cars in Ghost in the Shell, but having a hovercopter is pretty handy when one of the members, like say Saito, needs to line up a difficult shot from far away. Sometimes he's in the helicopter. Standard military helicopters also look more similar to the Wasps. These are called the Jigobachi. They're one of my favorite helicopters. And they fly, they really do look like wasps. Now, they're not ornithopters. They also have like a twin rotor design, but they have a main body, like the main housing with the pilot and the crew and everything. And then they have like a tail that comes down to like this turret, either like a big gun or a mini gun of sorts, any kind of assorted weaponry. And then of course, the off to the side are all the missiles and things. And of course, there's various degrees of cyborg enhancements. You got the modified shotgun arms. It's a classic. You've got the elaborate hacker rooms draped in electrical cables. The classic cyberpunk, the exoskeletons, the powered armor, they're also here in a variety of styles. Typically, like they have these sleek beetle-like exteriors and then rounded edges, for bullet deflection. And then they're generally propped up on these gazelle-like legs, not wings. I'm thinking about flying. Pick your flavor of powered exoskeleton. Cyberpunk 2077, all familiar things. You know it, you love it. And a lot of this stuff, like especially like the hardware, the military craft and everything, Standalone Complex employs extensive use of CGI. And this is his poor fellow, Makoto Endo, who's the CGI director on this anime. He had his work cut out for him. And Makoto Endo has been with Production IG since about 1999. He joined as a 3D programmer after finishing his master's degree at the Kanagawa Institute of Technology. But Standalone Complex is his first directorial position, and he's continued through all seasons of Standalone Complex, and then other times moving forward from this he was on CG direction for Le Chevalier d'Eon, Blood Plus, Moribito Guardian of the Spirit, Eden of the East, and then outside of Production IG, you've got Princess Principal and Yozakura Family. And around 2006, thereabouts, he left Production IG from his full-time capacity. But of course, obviously with Moribito and Eden of the East and others, he still worked on IG projects, just as in the capacity of from his computer graphics studio TriSlash. In addition to all of this hardware that I've just outlined, Standalone Complex also has a short form addendum called the Tachikomatic Days. And these are a short post-credits comedy segment that follows various conversations between the Tachikoma, ostensibly as they are, like they exist in this liminal white space, think like the Matrix weapons room, and various wacky cartoon hijinks and just weird conversations occur. And like a lot of video game jokes, so like the robots get blown up like a balloon, like in Dig Dug, or like Looney Tunes gags, you're getting pancaked by a 20-ton weight, peeled off the floor like a sheet of paper, summoning elements or stages from nowhere, being pelted by random objects. This had its own animation unit separate from the main production. So if you run through the production credits, you'll see like 3D animation. Then there's another studio down here and other groups, and they're called the Tachikomatic Unit. And so to kind of wrap up the animation portion of this, Standalone Complex, by comparison, had a more, I guess, air quotes, relaxed production schedule versus the usual weekly rush. At 2 episodes a month, and the amount of money and time that went into it, it really does show. The anime is still, of course, early 2000s digital compositing, but the majority of on-screen elements are still hand-drawn, including the backgrounds. They just then scanned and rendered all of the scenes in HD, which resulted in a picture quality well beyond the standard broadcast resolution at the time. So when we were actually going from standard definition into HD, into the full-on HD era, Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex made the transition seamlessly, even though it was pushing 10 years at the time. And I would argue Standalone Complex Season 1 was still contemporary with anime 15 years later. And it just adds as another example of Production IG's forward-thinking and experimental process paying off. And of course, if I am going to say one thing, of course, the regular animation still looks great. After almost 25 years, obviously the CG compositing is the most outdated aspect today. Of course, it was considered cutting edge at the time, and at least the Tachikoma are still decently well blended. You can tell a lot of work went into these AI robots in particular, and there are plenty of impressive shots throughout the anime, but the rest is very noticeable. The CG cars are very jarring. They stand out. All of the vehicles, the aircraft, just all the other, especially the power skeletons, just kind of look awkward. But of course, after over 20 years, the CG compositing has finally really just become, especially in Season 1. Season 2, of course, they improved it a little bit, so there's still a little bit there. But overall, even across the whole 52 episodes and just everything, you can tell this was high-budget computer graphics for 2002. And considering how, when I was reading for this episode, Makoto's Endo's workload and the CG team's workload, he started off as something like 40 cuts in episode 1, and they said we're going to need like an average of like 40 cuts per episode. In episode 2, that jumped up to 100, and it just kept building from there. It's like from the start, his workload got more than tripled. So on the whole, I'm actually even more impressed with how long the CGI actually kept up. What hasn't aged about this anime, however, is the amazing soundtrack. We got Yoko Kanno on this, everybody, the composer for all seasons and movies of Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex, and she really showed up for this one. Obviously, Cowboy Bebop, Visions of Escaflowne, Turn A Gundam, Wolf's Rain, Macross Plus, and Frontier, just a bevy of credits to her name. It's stellar every time. Kids on the Slope. This soundtrack is quintessential Kanno. And this is actually one of her more experimental works, although experimental feels like a very cheap label for what she's doing. And as far as her interviews and things that she's talked about when working on this one, she said Kenji Kamiyama was actually kind of hands-off as far as specific music requests. So Yoko Kanno was, in her own fashion, I love this quote. She says the writing process for Standalone Complex was like being a wild animal thrown into a poor man's lab experiment. And it was one of those like, okay, what does that even mean? And essentially, she said this was like just making a bunch of jam sessions and just seeing where the music went. And so in a way, if you are a fan of Cowboy Bebop soundtrack, it was kind of a similar writing process to that. Standalone Complex, although, is more of a chimera. It's like blends all jazz and rock, as you would expect from the composer of bebop. But there's electronica, symphonic, a little bit of J-pop, and then she'll just throw in these seemingly random computer noises and industrial sounds to create this soundscape wholly unique to this anime. And that's before we even get to the extensive vocal cast for the theme songs, including her own pseudonym, Gabriella Robin. And this is a credit as a vocalist when Yoko Kanno decides to sing the songs that she's also composed and arranged. But of course, in the concert setting, she's revealed, the singer to be like Origa or Maya Sakamoto when it would come for like the live performances. Kanno's over here directing all of the music, so she's not singing and directing everybody. But for the anime and also on the soundtrack, you have songs by credited to Gabriella Robin, and then composed and arranged, obviously, by Yoko Kanno. So here we go. We got opening credits, Inner Universe, performed by a singer named Origa. She was born in Russia and then signed with a Japanese record company in the 1990s. And Yoko Kanno knew about Origa prior to her official debut and wanted to collaborate with the artist for years, but could never find an opportunity until Standalone Complex. There's also the matter of the language barrier, but Kanno was able to convey the mood of the piece in Origa and essentially told her to compose whatever felt appropriate to the mood of that. Hence the lyrics of Inner Universe. It's this lovely mix of Russian, English, and Latin. The lyrics are also a collaboration between Origa and Japanese-American singer-songwriter Shanti Snyder, who also is sung for like Escaflowne the movie. We have Tim Jensen, a regular collaborator with Kanno and the Seatbelts from Cowboy Bebop. He composed lyrics for several of the songs in Standalone Complex, including Run Rabbit Junk and Dear John, and the ending credits theme Lithium Flower, plus the Japanese rebroadcast opening credits theme Get 9 when it was broadcast on Nippon Television. We also have Australian-born vocalist Scott Matthew lending his talents to the soundtrack following his contributions to Cowboy Bebop the movie Knockin' on Heaven's Door. He sings the song, he's the vocals for Lithium Flower. We also have the Italian singer Ilaria Graziano. She wrote and performed I Do, including several image songs for the soundtracks after the broadcast run. And this was all of this was a continuous process through both seasons. So these are all names you're going to hear again in a few months for Season 2. And Season 2 has an even higher volume of vocal insert tracks. Everyone on this list is worth checking out individually. But obviously the combination of talent on this soundtrack is worth the purchase. I love this anime soundtrack so much. When I was in college, I bought the Cowboy Bebop soundtrack as well as other anime soundtracks by Yoko Kanno. And as soon as I watched this anime, I bought all the albums for Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex, plus some of them were released as individuals. So there's one by Scott Matthew called like To Be Human that is just chef's kiss. It is so haunting. And these all formed like my college study room playlist. I am very familiar with this. This is just a really unique soundscape. It just doesn't do it justice. And really worth checking out both for the anime and individually. Getting into the voice cast now, obviously we have the Japanese crew from the first movie and Innocence are of course reprising their roles here. The English cast has more of a shakeup because in between the years of the 1995 movie and the dub for the PlayStation 1 game, there was a bit of a lull. But so now this is the cast moving forward for Standalone Complex, and then these will be the same cast. If you remember from Ghost in the Shell Innocence, that episode, this is the same cast that was brought from here. And again, as a quick reminder for Japan, Ghost in the Shell, this was a broadcast on pay-per-view Animax, and there was an English dub produced by Animax for broadcasts outside Japan. But for the US broadcast on Cartoon Network and YTV in Canada, this is the anime's dub with Kevin Seymour. So you have all the anime's regulars from Cowboy Bebop, Code Geass, Trigun, Wolf's Rain, Blackjack, The Big O. This is the crew that is on the home video release in the United States. So this is the crew that I will be listing for the English credits in this episode. There is also an OVA retelling of the television series with some additional animation. You've got the Japanese cast in the same, but the English dub was actually produced by Ocean Group. So if you're wondering why the cast in essentially what are the compilation movies for the seasons of Ghost in the Shell standalone complex, the compilation movies, that's why. That's an Ocean Group dub. So again, we're sticking with the anime's dub for the English actors here. So of course, kicking us off, we got Motoko Kusanagi, who is voiced by Atsuko Tanaka. Rest in peace. She's the voice of all Ghost in the Shell projects up until 2024, as well as voicing Bayonetta and Rosa. She's got the voice lines in Smash Brothers. She was the voice of Ultimecia from the Dissidia Final Fantasy franchise, Cyrene from Devilman Crybaby, and Amida Arcada from Gundam Iron-Blooded Orphans. And then in English, this is Mary Elizabeth McGlynn, who's Queen Metalia from Sailor Moon, Cornelia Britannia from Code Geass. Also a lot of involvement with the Naruto series, both as an actor and ADR and voice direction. And she also handled ADR next to Kevin Seymour on the standalone complex English dub. Her second in command is Bato, voiced by Atsuko Otsuka in Japanese, and Richard Epcar in English, both guys known for voicing gruff, tough dudes. Otsuka-san is, of course, Yuichiro Hanma from the Netflix release of Baki. He is the Skull Knight from Berserk. He is Blackjack from Blackjack. And a recent inheritor to the role of Daisuke Jigen, beginning with Lupin III Part 6. Richard Epcar, of course, is Genma Himuro from Ninja Scroll. Joseph Joestar from Stardust Crusaders and Diamond is Unbreakable. And he has also voiced Daisuke Jigen and Inspector Zenigata for over a dozen Lupin III projects. Both men have also voiced Xehanort from Kingdom Hearts. So again, very familiar voice roles, very long catalog for the both of them. And next up we have Togasa, who's the only civilian in the crew, the former police detective. He's got a wife and kid back home. Everyone else in the Section 9 is basically unattached. And even like Motoko and Bato and at least a few others, but Motoko and Bato for sure have a series of safe houses they just kind of float between, or sometimes Motoko will take will take a hotel room or something. But Togasa is, of course, voiced by Koichi Yamatera. He is, again, another very well-known actor, especially in the years prior to this anime. This is the voice of Spike Spiegel from Cowboy Bebop, Ryoji Kaji from Evangelion, Jubei from Ninja Scroll, and Inspector Zenigata on Lupin III since around 2011. Crispin Freeman for English. In the English dub, he's comfortably in his role as playing the sort of grizzled detective. He's got other contemporary works around this time include Sume from Wolf's Rain and Detective Amon in Witch Hunter Robin, which I'm actually currently watching Robin on the side. It's kind of interesting. Also a police kind of, it's also kind of like a cop show, but with witches. And a contemporary work to recent years is, of course, The Medicine Seller from the Mononoke films. These are the ones being released directly from Netflix. Then we have Section Chief Aramaki, the old man in the chair, voiced by Osamu Saka, General Hawk from G.I.G, the movie. Seitaro Sasaki, also the old man in the chair from Pat Labor, voiced by William Frederick Knight in English, who's Gordon Rosewater from The Big O, Kuzumi the Sage from Eureka 7, and Danzo Shimura from Naruto Shippuden as just a couple of roles. And then we have the hacker of the group, who's and also kind of like another grumpy old man. In fact, I think he's like the second oldest in the team, if I'm thinking about it. But yeah, Ishikawa is the resident hacker. He's the exposition guy. Whenever there's a case or something, he's going like, all right, here's where we are. Here's our suspects. What do we think? And then the conversation will happen in the meeting room. But Ishikawa, we have Yutaka Nakano, who voices a bunch of gruff old man. So we got the baseball coach Kunimoto from Ace of the Diamond. He's got a recurring role as a frog doctor, or a doctor from the Certain Scientific Railgun and the Magical Index series, and Shaobon-kun from Kingdom. Ishikawa is voiced by Michael McCarty, who's usually behind the scenes as like a sound engineer. He's done like digital tracking and mixing, ADR, but he's done a couple of supporting characters. But Ishikawa is one of his bigger supporting characters. He's also done side roles in Fist of the North Star, Trigun, Serial Experiments Lane, Mobile Suit Gundam, 8th MS Team. But most of these are under the alias Devon Michaels, and then Michael McCarty uses his real name for more like the audio engineering side. And after Ishikawa, this is the first like full on-screen debut for the more like the very, very side characters. So if you have like Major Bato Togasa, and then Ishikawa is like one of the main secondaries, You have Saito, who's the sniper of the team, and he gets a couple of outings. We need a guy to go and make this really difficult shot, put Saito out in the field, and then he's supported by the other two characters, and like in the background helping. Either in the background helping Ishikawa do research or kind of do like his backdoor hacking stuff, or sometimes they're in the field and they're laying down supporting fire next to Saito. So these guys are Paz and Borma, so we'll get on them in a little bit here. Saito, he's the sniper of the team. So again, he's voiced by Toru Okawa, who's been the voice of Detective Pikachu, and but mostly Roy Mustang from Full Metal Alchemist. And then he's voiced by Dave Wittenberg in English. One of the main roles I could see from him would be Kakashi from Naruto. And then again, Pazu, who by his character design, he looks more like he might have been like a former Yakuza guy. And so he's voiced by Takashi Onozuka. And he's a voice actor mostly with side roles in anime, but he has bigger voice acting credits in the dub-overs of other projects. So the main one that is for Onozuka's voice credits, if you were interested in the Japanese dub of Teen Titans and Teen Titans Go, this is Dick Grayson, or he's the voice of Robin. And those properties also from Young Justice, the Lego Batman movie, as well as Batman, the Brave and the Bold. For English sides, we got Robert Buchholz, who's scripting dialogue and a voice director with animes, but he's also very funny as a role as a Beck Gold, a minor villain and a minor recurring villain from the Big O, but who's also like very fun, very chaotic. He has a lot of fun in that role, but he's much more of a subdued instance in here. He's very much a support character, just kind of, he's kind of like the guy of like, okay, I'll take care of this, you go on ahead, and then Multico Kusanagi will go and do her usual badass lady stuff. And then rounding us off, we have Borma. Ostensibly, he's supposed to be the bombs or munitions expert, but there aren't really that many cases that cover bombings, especially in a very recent 9/11 scape. Anything to do with bombings or things like with buildings, probably a couple of broadcast regulations or just harder to fit into a larger narrative. But Borma is like general background investigator, taking pictures for crime scene stuff. Like they have him doing all these things in the background, but you never really see him step into the limelight. But for what it's worth, he's voiced by Taro Yamaguchi, who's, I got one role here, Geld from that time I got reincarnated as a slime. And then Don Wayne, who's a TV movie actor, but I did find that he is the voice of Lysander from Pokemon Generations. That's episode 16. And I also want to say, as far as our antagonist here, we've got Steve Bloom is in this anime as well, but he's very much doing like side roles and background characters. But for what it's worth, Steve Bloom is the voice of the Laughing Man villain. But the first time I heard this person speak, I didn't actually realize it was Steve Blum. Steve is kind of pitching up his voice just a little bit. And in the Japanese side, the Koichi Yamadera, on top of voicing Togusa, is also the voice of the Laughing Man and also like just various other background characters. As far as the Tachikoma, the AI helper bots, they have very high-pitched voices, so I think your mileage may vary on you either love them or it's just kind of like it's just too much. I personally really like them. I think Sakiko Tamagawa does a really good job bringing over like the childlike just innocence of these guys. Other roles include Kazama's mother from Crayon Shin-chan, the television and movie series. And then, that's like one of her big roles. She's been in that role forever. And then for the English dub, they decided to do something different. There is actually a rotating cast of 3 voice actresses. We have Julie Maddalena, who's done like Hikaru Shido from Magic Knights Rayearth, Peggy O'Neill from from Lucky Star. She voices Ayana Minagishi, and Sandy Fox, who voices Sailor Chibi Moon from obviously Sailor Moon. And essentially, this is a way to because all the Tachikoma look the exact same, and so as Sakiko Tamagawa gives them little different pitches to her voice, Julie, Peggy, and Sandy give them slightly different performances, and they basically just stick to these one specific, like it's like Tachikomas 1, 2, and 3. And so as far as both performances, I mean, it's a stellar cast, no complaints at all. It really just comes down to preference, whether you want to pay more attention and read the subtitles, or if you want to pay more attention to the visuals. Yeah, I think Standalone Complex Season 1 holds up relatively well today, thanks to, again, Production IG's decisions to render the animation in advance, like in HD, which of course looks incredible on the DVD release, and I've read that it transfers pretty well to the Blu-rays. Again, I don't have them, so I can't directly point to anything, but the reviews are generally positive. CGI being what it is, I've already covered all that. It's much harder to upscale that. In fact, CGI is exactly a separate element from the 2D animation. And so essentially to bring this into true HD, it would have to be recompiled and reintegrated frame by frame. And of course, they would have to know where those files are. So not only do they probably not have them, it's ridiculously expensive to do that. But as far as the plot, I really do enjoy how this season, when they were starting on this, they were intentional about Ghost in the Shell having trying to emulate the feel of the manga rather than directly adapt any particular storyline one-to-one. And it's also interesting to observe the results of various predictions and concepts that were presented in this anime, all the way back, 20 plus years ago, that have come true in some forms, or to see what they got completely off. So obviously we aren't all walking around with cyber brains. But in a sense, this is like Ghost in the Shell's cyber brains are kind of like the smartphones. They are always, everyone's always just connected to the network all the time. And so it's really the society as a whole is kind of reflecting the dangers and the consequences of an always online society and a always online mentality. The whole thing of just today is almost impossible to disconnect ourselves from technology. We've given so much of ourselves over to this technology, and that we now are more dependent on it, and it's so much harder to let go and be independent of this technology. Of course, our current rise in generative AI and all the issues surrounding its usage and the environmental impacts, Ghost in the Shell has had more like maybe not so much of a positive, but it's always had like a neutral attitude, or at least on the concept of AI. I also don't believe like the tech itself isn't malicious, but it turns into something malicious when it's misused by humans, which has always been a core theme of Masamune Shirow's work from the beginning. Not just Ghost in the Shell. You go through his entire deal, it's like, here's this wonderful technology. It has the potential to do so much good, but then, you have a couple of bad actors who ruin everybody else's day. And so this is just going along with the theme. It also ties into this usage of technology and who would take advantage of this to take advantage of others. Ghost in the Shell also portrays a sharp divide in the social classes and the extreme societal wealth gap through all the environmental storytelling. This is not a pristine utopic vision of the future. Government and politicians are as corrupt as always and as self-serving as always. And there's a lot of people suffering. And of course, this season, it's a medical scandal. And it is for season 2, second G.I.G, the main story revolves around a refugee/immigration crisis. Getting back to the internet side of things, Standalone Complex also portrays the use of online avatars, which is basically with how we would identify probably as like VTubers today. VR chat rooms, where again, like through the use of a cyberbrain, there's an episode called Chat, where Motoko is in a chat room. It's a lot of virtual users sitting around a table with a virtual audience, like people in the audience, and they are all talking about the Laughing Man incident. So it's an interesting way of like, here's how everyday people interact with each other online. And, also just various aspects of internet culture, specifically meme culture. That's the second thing about Standalone Complex sometimes. Like, oh, Ghost in the Shell predicted meme culture. Not exactly, but it is an interesting and early portrayal of internet meme culture, wherein the Laughing Man's laughing logo, takes over the pop culture and the underground culture scene in this anime in a way that, something just innocuous or some other logo or a mascot or, what have you, something online just suddenly takes off for no reason whatsoever. And now it's the only thing everybody can talk about for a number of months. All of this and several other things, there's a long list of things that I could talk about, but yeah, I think you get the picture. As far as the characters side of thing, Motoko Kusanagi, she's obviously the chief appeal of the series. This is also my favorite iteration of the character. The toughest nails, no-nonsense boss lady is still there, but this version of Motoko is more rooted in the interest of well-being of her subordinates. So there's a lot more like exploration of like why everybody looks up to her, not just that she's super capable, but she really is looking out for everyone. Basically, the 26 episode runtime is a lot longer to get to know this character and explore different facets in her personality than has been previously explored in the manga or the movie, where she was basically like, I'm straightforward, no nonsense, and we have a job to do. This extends again to the cast. Everyone just feels grounded, but like in particular, like Section 9 just feels united by their common passion for justice to be done and their willingness to work within the system of their government, even though they can see clearly the bureaucracy can get in the way, but they are still willing to work within the established system, because in the end, like, they can't just go off and do like vigilante stuff all the time, because that's not how society is changed for the better. So they are still like working within and trying to improve the justice system, and it's where it's within the political side and all of the wheeling and dealing as well, is where we get to see a lot more of Chief Aramaki as well. He's the old military man with all the connections, and he's dedicated. He is also sly as a fox to boot. And Aramaki is presented almost like a spy master. He has some clandestine meetings in a park, or he'll have like a brief elevator conversation where intel is swapped. Sometimes he's spreading misinformation in order to draw out a particular criminal, or make one of make the bad guy slip up. You only see him really angry when he sees or senses like a grave injustice being done, or when he knows he has someone cornered, like a very powerful political figure. You can tell when he's trying to give them an out, or he's trying to give them a chance to confess, and they just throw it back into his face. And you just kind of see it you can see it in Aramaki's face of like, all right, you asked for this. So all of this and more. I really think Aramaki is just one of my favorite characters in Ghost in the Shell, thanks to Standalone Complex. And I'm not the only one who thinks this. His own voice actor, Osamu Saka, on one of the DVD interviews, who says it outright. He says, and quote, "I think Aramaki's foundation is love, which is why the Section 9 members are as loyal to him as they are," end quote. Whenever Aramaki is speaking, everybody pays attention, and they crack jokes at the old man, and he'll engage with them on that. It's almost like Section 9 are his kids. On the whole, like I see like the standalone episodes allow for all of these individual expressions of the Section 9 members, even though it mostly translates to, again, Motoko, Bato, Togusa, Aramaki, sometimes Ishikawa, the guy in the chair, and then Saito. But, also like Bato and Togusa get to redo their classic buddy cop team up. You got the super soldier cyborg bachelor and the everyday married man family detective. You got the relationship, particularly like with Bato and Motoko. She is his boss, and there's more time for this anime to kind of go like, okay, what is, like, obviously you could tell, like in the original movie, and of course in the manga, that Bato clearly admires Motoko, and there might be something deeper there, but of course she's fully cyborg, and all the other barriers that exist between them. So Standalone Complex, there are certain times where, like when they're alone, there's a different tone of voice that they use with each other, and there's a way that they just can casually speak to each other, that they don't talk. They just don't talk that way in front of anybody else. And then on the rare occasion, she'll even let him like put an arm around her shoulders or like hold her a little close. But it never goes beyond that. But if you're looking for individual episodes on Ishikawa, Saito, Pazu, and Borma, unfortunately, there's not much for them to do in this anime. Ishikawa, being the chief information man, never leaves his hacker chair or the base. Practically never. Sometimes, like in the rare occasion, he's in a firefight if they really, really need the manpower. Pazu and Borma float around in the background of this anime as like various support capacities. I know Pazu gets an individual episode in the next season, but Borma really doesn't have much to do in this one. Saito at least gets trotted out occasionally for a sniping mission, or he's providing overwatch. Obviously, on the animation side, action scenes are stellar. You got the tight coordination. I love the hand-to-hand combat in this. Kamiyama's direction follows the kung fu camera work. He'll let every action and reaction show on screen, but then he'll suddenly mix things up, especially when Motoko is involved. She is a very acrobatic and fast character, and usually taking on targets much bigger than her. So not only is she fast and acrobatic, she's also she doesn't go to fisticuffs sometimes. She's more trying to do grappling. So a lot of the leaping and cartwheeling and backflipping and doing leaping kicks and grapples. So I always think of the Black Widow when Scarlett Johansson's pulling off some really cool move to take down a dude twice her size. There's also a lot of attention to detail with the gunfights. I'm not a gun person, but as far as the universe that is being built, the firearms feel like they have the appropriate amount of kickback and noise and appropriate weight to it, which all enhances the realism of the scenes. Sometimes Kamiyama will suddenly start doing shaky cam stuff. So seeing shaky cam in an anime is never a dull moment when things kick off in standalone Complex. It's not perfect, of course, nothing is. I think season 1 relies a bit much on the standalone episodes to the detriment of the Laughing Man storyline. Now, it's nice to have bite-sized, digestible episodes, but the primary case of the Laughing Man is very complex. It has all of these various elements that you always think you have it figured out, but then someone else crops up, and the potential list of suspects just balloons to this massive deal. So they're trying to sift through all this stuff, all these bluffs and double bluffs, red herrings. It's a very, very dense anime to watch. This is not something that is suitable, I would say, for a casual viewing experience, to have it on in the background. Unless you've seen it again a dozen times like me, then yes, I know the episodes almost by heart. But I mean, for your first time, this is an anime that's hey, pay attention. So if you're not a fan of overly dense material, then I can see this kind of being a detriment. But of course, for me, I love this stuff. But because the Laughing Man case is so complex, it's hard to recall exactly what happened in the previous arc after I sit through 3 to 4 episodes of unrelated or, again, the standalone material. But then some of these standalone episodes are very philosophical, and they one episode of those is almost worth 3 in the amount of content that gets put in there. Sometimes there's a little bit too much detail. This is also a conversation-heavy anime. A lot of talking, a lot of meetings and recap conversations, which is a delicate balance to strike, and I don't think this season really gets it correctly. Namely, there's just a bit of overstating the obvious, I think. So again, it's just very dense material. Your mileage may vary. And as far as the Laughing Man himself, I found this character to be an interesting study on what happens when you have this seemingly everyday person who then tries to expose this massive corruption scheme within a system, but then ends up becoming a folk hero in the process. But as an antagonist and kind of who's supposed to be the main target of the show, the whole reason we're doing this case in the first place, the Laughing Man himself just doesn't have the charisma, I think, to carry the show. And I think your mileage will also vary on the ultimate conclusion of the Laughing Man case. I can appreciate the ending now that I've, of course, watched the show several times. They get the bad guy, don't get me wrong, but after all that Section 9 endures to bring the case to its conclusion in the final 6 episodes, and then all of a sudden it just screeches to a halt, and it's asking you to examine and say, okay, what was it all for? And, I kind of feel like Section 9, at least at the end of this anime, kind of gets the raw end of the deal, which is why I feel the next entry in 2004 with the second season, second G.I.G, takes several steps to have a much more compelling villain that more directly and repeatedly challenges Section 9 where they are most vulnerable. So I hesitate to say, obviously I don't think it's a bad ending. I just think it's an interesting way to end, the first season. And then, of course, the second season will go, begins with, oh yeah, here's the fallout of all of that stuff that happened. So I guess what I'm trying to say is all of the things that they outlined in, the first episode of Season 2 is what I wish we had at the end of Season 1. But to end things on a more personal note, obviously this is still my favorite anime, and Standalone Complex also kickstarted my anime collecting journey. Now, I'd heard of Ghost in the Shell in high school. When I started watching anime, my friend group had told me about Ghost in the Shell, but I really didn't check it out until college. And it was around 2013 when I rented the first film on Google Play, back when they still had Google Movies and the TV and the music app. So I rented it on Google Movies, and I really liked the first film. So this got me interested in the rest of the Ghost of the Shell. And in college, I was in the marching bands at Mississippi State University marching band, and we traveled to a bowl game at the end of 2013. It's like the Orange Bowl, I think, in Florida. One of those bowl games in Florida for college football. And as we usually did, we stopped at a mall for lunch. And what the band would do is they would give us a meal stipend. So for the entire trip, they said, here's an envelope with money. My strategy was always to eat as cheaply as possible. And so I would usually buy a video game or something like that. Well, this mall had an FYE, so four-year entertainment store. I had known about them, but I'd never visited one before. Mississippi had these stores, but not anywhere near my location. And of course, now they have moved completely out of the state since like 2020. So this was my first time seeing anime DVDs and Blu-ray on the shelf at an FYE. And of course, back then they were known for running a buy one, get one for $1 on pre-owned media. So my first ever anime purchased was pre-owned Blu-rays for Soul Eater. And then I got the complete collection Ghost in the Shell standalone complex DVD set for $1. And a few months later, I found the limited edition box set for season 2, which anytime you see a picture of my anime collection shelf, that is the centerpiece of my anime collection. And I binged Standalone Complex at my house, and I watched it immediately again after finishing my first watch. So again, I love science fiction and mystery thrillers, so my love of Ghost in the Shell as a whole, this was exactly what I was looking for. I love this anime. And it also gave me the bug to make several more poor financial decisions in college related to anime when I should have been buying, groceries. And of course, I've been collecting now for 13 years at this point, and I can owe it directly to Ghost in the Shell standalone complex. So for all those reasons and more, this is my favorite anime. And so I knew as soon as I started the anime field guide again, I said, this time, I never reviewed Ghost in the Shell on the Treehouse Anime Club. I was bound and damn determined that I'm going to come back to anime podcasting and I'm going to review my favorite anime. And I'm ready to do lots more. And of course, there's a lot more Ghost in the Shell to review in the future. So if you made it this far, thank you once again for joining in my first year of podcasting. Please leave a 5-star review if you like what you heard. Tell me about all of your favorite anime in the episode comments and on the socials. What do you think of Ghost in the Shell standalone complex? Is this your first time checking it out? Is it an old favorite? Do you not really care about it? Also, some quick reminders. So the next episode in May will be Gurren Lagann, again, the winner of our Mecha March Madness poll. And our upcoming studio rundown is Science Sotaru, sometime probably at the end of this month or early May. So once again, thank you for sticking around with the Anime Field Guide and my episode on Ghost in the Shell standalone complex. And until next time, stay safe and watch more cartoons.